A while ago, I had the pleasure of attending a presentation given by 3 professional chefs, and watching these 3 chefs cook was absolutely fantastic. I can't remember when I've been so entertained. It was fun to watch these professionals and to see the way they do it. One of the chefs made Risotto Primavera. If you're not familiar with the term Primavera, it's an Italian term. I've also seen it as alla Primavera, meaning in the style of springtime. It's a dish that's typically made with springtime or summer vegetables. They can be raw, tossed into a dish, they can be blanched, they can be cooked. The one you've seen most likely is pasta primavera, which is pasta made with fresh vegetables. I'm going to make this risotto primavera today. I've always made risotto with chicken stock, and this chef was making his risotto with vegetable stock. And when I questioned him about that, he said it's because some of his clients in his restaurant are vegan. Why not make a vegan risotto? So that's what I'm going to do today. And then let me show you next to the ingredients I'm going to be using, not only to make my risotto, but also to make my vegetable stock. To make my risotto, I have 1 cup, which is about 200 grams of arborio rice. And therefore, I'm going to be using between 2.5 to 3 cups, or really roughly 600 to 700 milliliters of my vegetable stock. And then I have a 1/4 cup, which is about 40 grams of peas. You can use fresh or frozen. And then use the same amount. Diced carrots, I'm going to dice a carrot to about the same size of those peas. Again, about a 1/4 cup. 1/4 cup of diced onion, a 1/4 cup of diced squash. This is butternut squash. And then a 1/4 cup of diced celery. Obviously, I have more squash than I really need, so I'm going to be roasting this and putting the roasted squash aside for my Lazy Man meals. If you don't know my Lazy Man meals, I have a whole page on the website about Lazy Man meals. The peelings from my squash, as well as my other vegetables, are going to go into my stock. The chef had the advantage of working in a professional restaurant, so he had trim all day long from the various foods they would work with in the kitchen, that he could use the trim to make his stock. I had to go out and buy my vegetables. So for my stock, I'm going to be using carrots, celery, onion. This is a parsnip. I have a rutabaga, a leek, and then, as I mentioned, the trim from my butternut squash. And then I've got some olive oil here that I'll be using as well when I sweat my vegetables before making my stock. So those are the ingredients I'm using. When it comes to making a vegetable stock, whatever you've got as far as fresh vegetables, whatever you want to buy, whatever trim you have, most of it is fine as far as making a stock. The one thing I think you need to avoid is something that's high in acid, such as tomatoes. When it comes to the Primavera, it's about as much about its presentation as it is about the flavor. So I diced everything about the same size as my peas, carrots, my butternut squash, celery, onions. When it comes to making the stock, who cares? You just chop everything up. I'm going to put this in a stock pot. I'm actually going to use a pressure cooker. And then put water in this, just enough to cover it, and then I'm going to cook this for about 30 minutes, let it cool down, and then I'll be straining and even using some muslin to squeeze my vegetables to get as much juice out of my vegetables as possible. As far as seasoning my stock, I have about a dozen peppercorns in here, 2 or 3 bay leaves, some crushed garlic. This is some dried basil that I had. This is a good opportunity to use up some herbs that you've had in the cupboard for a long time. Those will go into my stock and cook with my stock to give it some flavor. To get started here, I have my stock pot, in this case my pressure cooker, heating on the stove. I'm going to put maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of olive oil in the bottom of this pan. And then I'm going to put my vegetables in and sweat them. Sweating will increase the flavor. I'm turning my heat down to medium. Increase the flavor release of these vegetables. I'm going to do this for about 5 minutes. Then, as I mentioned, I'm going to add enough water to cover my vegetables, put in my flavorings, my bay leaves and so forth, put the lid on, and then cook these for about 30 minutes, letting it cool, and then I'll be ready to start straining my stock. There's my pressure cooker. It has come up to full pressure, which on this one is indicated by 2 red lines. I have to move this to a back burner because this front burner, even at the lowest setting, is too warm. This is such an efficient pressure cooker. If you're nervous about using a pressure cooker, don't be. Today's pressure cookers have enough redundant safety features in them that they're very safe to use, but for goodness sakes, buy a good one. Don't get a cheap one. I started off with a cheap one and I only got about a dozen uses out of it before it failed. It didn't blow up, but it had a bad pressure regulator valve in it. So I bought a really good one. It's all stainless steel. Even the pressure valve inside is stainless steel. So this has to sit now for 30 minutes. I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes and then let it cool down, and I'll be ready to start straining and squeezing my vegetables to get my stock. I keep some cotton muslin in a Ziploc bag in my kitchen that I use just for this purpose. And these are my vegetables that I've allowed time for these to cool down so that I can handle them without burning myself by just putting it in the muslin and just twist, twist, twist and wringing. See the juice coming out of there? That would all be lost juice if I just simply discarded these vegetables. The next thing I need to do, and this is a bit tricky because this is my chinois, and this is too big for this bowl, but it's just about right. I need to strain the stock that I concentrated, because this still has some small solids in it. Look at all that golden stock. There it is. There's my concentrated stock. There's my additional 2 cups of stock. To make risotto, you keep some stock simmering. Just going to take that off the heat a little bit because you want it to keep it hot. As you keep cooking and stirring your rice, it's the constant stirring that gives risotto its creamy texture. But you don't want the cooking to ever stop. Normally I would use butter and olive oil in this pan, but because I'm making a vegan stock or vegan risotto, I'm going to only use olive oil. So I need to heat up my olive oil, and once that's hot, I'll put my rice in, stir it, and then I'll be adding broth a little at a time, or stock in this case, vegetable stock. So I have about maybe 2, maybe 3 tablespoons of olive oil in there. There's my arborio rice. Give that a nice stir. And I'm going to start off with a couple of ladles of stock here. And of course you got to get it on the stove. That's a prerequisite. And for those of you who are wondering, that's why I have my stove covered with foil. So my rice now is starting to boil here. I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes. And then reduce my heat to low. And then I'm going to stay with this rice, stirring it, stirring it, stirring it while it's cooking. Most of that liquid has been absorbed. So now I want to put in another ladle of stock. Stir this in, bring this back up to a boil, and then keep going. And that's how you make risotto. You work in a ladle at a time and stirring it because it will stick if you don't. And there goes my timer. This has been cooking for 10 minutes. I'm going to switch to a rubber spatula next because I'm going to start putting my vegetables in. Carrot, celery, squash, onions, and my peas. And I think for color, I'm going to put in some saffron threads. At this point, I can just pour some of my stock in there. And this is the reason why I switched to my spatula, because I don't want with my rubber spoon, and with my wooden spoon rather, to damage those vegetables. I want to cook the vegetables now in the risotto. Set this for another 10 minutes. And I'll be tasting this once I get the last of that stock, this stock here, once this is absorbed. I'll be tasting it for the tenderness of the rice. I want an al dente rice, and then I'll taste it for salt. I'm not going to add any pepper to this. I don't want black specks in there. If I feel like it needs pepper, I'll add some white pepper. Okay, I'm ready to add the last of my stock here. Turn that heat off. And by the way, if I haven't mentioned it yet, I'm cooking over low heat here. I just want to simmer this rice very gently. We are coming up on 20 minutes here. There's 20 minutes. I'm going to turn my heat off. And there's my risotto, nice and creamy. I want to taste this for salt. My famous red-handled spoon. Red-handled means this does not go into the cooking pot. A little bit al dente, but boy, does that need salt. Maybe a quarter teaspoon to start off with. Stir that salt in. Once again, tasting spoon. Okay, I like that. It's got a nice vegetable flavor to it because of the stock. And look how creamy that is as far as texture. So there is Risotto Primavera. There it is, a nice big bowl of Risotto Primavera ready for serving. This would serve 6 to 8 people as a side dish. And I could see some vegetarians enjoying this as a regular meal. Okay, I do have some of my finger-licking chicken on the table, so I'm going to have this as a side dish with my chicken. I got to see how this tastes. Oh, that's creamy and smooth. It's common to put a little bit of cheese, some Parmesan or Romano cheese in risotto, but again, we're doing a vegetarian risotto here, so this is all vegetables and no meat. Oh, this is good. Okay. Excuse me, I got to go have my dinner. To view the recipe and download a PDF version with step-by-step photographs, click the Jump to Recipe icon in the lower right corner or visit my website, mobilehomegourmet.com.